Hi there, and welcome to DevOps Days. My name is Ian Gotts. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Elements.cloud, and I'm going to take you through how we accelerate the implementation lifecycle. So if you need to get hold of me, there I am, Ian at Elements.cloud, or follow me on Twitter at Ian Gotts. So Salesforce is now becoming a strategic platform, and it's a major investment for most companies. Combine that with COVID, and the digital transformation agenda has been accelerated. As someone said the other day, 5 years has now become 5 months or 5 weeks. And to accelerate that digital transformation agenda, we need organizations to be very agile. And now, as every organization runs on technology, particularly Salesforce, we need more and more rapid implementations to make that business really agile. The challenge, of course, is that rapid implementation raises risks. So what's required is increased Salesforce adoption. We want to make sure we increase the ROI of Salesforce. We need to make sure that everyone who has a license is using it. Everyone who's using it is getting the most value out of it. The second thing we need to do is accelerate that implementation lifecycle to make sure we get those changes that users want into production as quickly as possible. But at the same time, we want to reduce that delivery risk. So as it says at the bottom, it's about adoption, agility, and trust. So if we look at the Capado State of the Salesforce DevOps report that they created in 2019, what we've discovered is the elite performers have managed to balance both mastering risk and at the same time increasing speed. If we look at 10K Advisors' survey called From Project to Program, a couple of interesting things came out of that. Firstly, those companies that had the greatest ROI were those who had the most frequent releases. So those who were releasing continuously or daily had a far, far higher return on investment from Salesforce than those who released maybe monthly or quarterly. And again, we see with large organizations with very complex orgs, the risk of releasing means that they tend to release very slowly. That obviously slows down the business agility and that ROI, which is driven by the business users, how well they can use Salesforce, gets stalled, and therefore the ROI of Salesforce goes down. So again, the challenge is managing that risk and getting up that release cycle. The other thing that the report showed was that those organizations who had a structured approach, a center of excellence, they had a far higher return on investment. As you can see on the left of this diagram, 91% had a very high ROI if they had a center of excellence. And on the right-hand side, you can see those people, whether they rated themselves A players, B players, or C players. Those who rated themselves as a well-run org A, again, had the highest return on investment. So there are some parallels here: faster implementation cycles and a structured approach for delivery of those changes through a center of excellence and a well-implemented DevOps cycle. Those are the companies that are winning. Those are the people who are investing in Salesforce but getting the best return out of them. So there are 3 ways to accelerate that Salesforce return on investment. The first is build the apps that the users need, not what they thought they wanted. What I mean by that is that do the analysis and get to a stage where you genuinely understand exactly what the business requirement is before you start coding. If you take the approach with, I'll start coding, you go and find out what they want, you'll end up with applications that need rework. Secondly, you'll have adoption that just goes nowhere. So if we spend the time doing decent analysis, capturing the business requirements, understanding the business processes, and then creating really crisp user stories, we will eliminate rework and we'll have far higher adoption of the applications we build. So that's the first thing. Second thing, we need to get changes into production faster. And what that means is that we obviously need to streamline our DevOps processes, but we could also look at those DevOps processes with a view to what the level of risk is. So maybe we can have a streamlined or a fast track approach for those low risk releases, maybe putting them straight into production. And then those more complex releases with high risk, we can put through the more rigorous dev cycle. So therefore we can fast track some of those changes. And again, that will accelerate our business agility. It will also reduce some of the development effort. So why are we putting a very simple, low-risk change all the way through development, 2 sandboxes, integration sandbox, and then into production? We're wasting a ton of time and effort in development. So again, documenting and then streamlining, doing process re-engineering on our dev process means that we can accelerate changes into production. And the last thing is probably the most important when we look at very large and complex orgs, and that means any org that's probably over 3 or 4 years old. We need to make sure we're putting those changes in, but not breaking the org. This idea that we put a change in, we then have to have a release rollback because there was something went wrong. There was a metadata item which we didn't understand the implications of making that change. An org gets broken, we can't use the org. And that does 2 things. One, it obviously reduces the, if we do this well, we reduce the downtime. But the second time, we increase user trust. The business users are more likely to start to give us the sort of suggested changes that they want and the confidence those changes can be put in reliably. So these are 3 ways to accelerate the Salesforce return on investment. None of them are rocket science. All of them are achievable, and we're seeing that in those highly run organizations. So let's look at the implementation life cycle. So I think, first of all, it's important to get all of us on the same page and make sure we all understand what we're talking about. It all starts here at train and feedback, where we're capturing the user's requirements, where they're starting to identify improvements to improve their productivity. We're capturing that feedback. Then we take that feedback and we start to generate the business requirements and capturing other business requirements that may come from business initiatives, from statement of work coming from other areas, not just the end users. So that's business initiatives coming from the top. We will then map our business processes to validate those requirements and identify ones that haven't been thought of. We then do some org impact analysis so we can start to understand the changes that we're going to make to the Salesforce org. So again, we're starting to reduce the risk of those changes by understanding which metadata items are impacted and then the dependency or the knock-on effect of those metadata items, which enables us to write user stories. And those user stories not only are linked to the metadata items, but they're linked to the process maps, they're linked to the ERDs, linked to the requirements, so we've got more context. We may also have documentation it's linked to. But then really importantly, we're starting to assess each of those user stories and give them a level of risk. And earlier on I said that we were able to fast track some releases because they had low risk user stories. This is where we're starting to categorize those user stories for risk against 3 criteria. 1, technical. What changes do we need to make to the org? 2nd, operational. How much is this going to impact the business? And 3rd, regulatory. If we make these changes, do we have issues in terms of compliance? Those user stories now can be passed and synchronized to Jira if you're running Jira, or straight into Capado. And that's where Capado takes over, and you're starting to do your code development and inside Salesforce. Capado may be managing that through the sandboxes, development sandboxes, all the way through to production. But at the same time, we're actually then documenting the changes we're making. So what we need to do is start to build up that institutional knowledge of why we made those changes, because the next time we come around the cycle, we have more information to be able to do better impact analysis. Obviously, we're backing up our metadata, we're deploying through the deployment lifecycle, maybe loading data, and then we're releasing the application into production. At the same time, we may then also be releasing any updated training material. We're monitoring the application, doing backup and restore, then compliance means that we are making sure that our end users are following due process. If you're in a highly regulated environment, they then may identify new ideas, improvements, and feedback, and then we're around the cycle again. So that is a standard implementation life cycle, whether it's Salesforce, SAP, ServiceNow, whatever application. But particularly focused on Salesforce, there are a number of partners who are the dream team to make this implementation cycle work really well, particularly in an enterprise environment. So there's the dream team: Elements, Capado, Own Backup, and Provar. So in the bottom left-hand corner, Analyze is all about elements. Capado we've talked about in terms of build and delivery. Provar obviously up there in testing. Own backup in terms of backup in the delivery phase and backup and restore in the operate phase. So if I focus on Elements for a moment about the way that this pulls together the entire implementation lifecycle. So there are real benefits if we get this right. As it says there, 40 change requests delivered per week, a 25% time saving for development teams, org analysis reduced from 3 weeks down to 2 days. An analysis workshop identified savings which turned into 40 hours of savings per week. So don't underestimate the importance of this analyze phase. People are very quick to go straight into build, but again, there are huge costs of rushing into build before you really know what you're doing. As I said over here, Elements is providing pop-up help inside a page layout so people can submit feedback. We're managing requirements, we're managing process maps, we're doing all the metadata analysis by pulling all the metadata out of Salesforce and doing the analysis. And you can write user stories there, all of which are being pushed back into this central database, which means it can be reused inside Salesforce, reused inside Jira, reused inside Capado. When it comes to the delivery phase, we can start to reuse that metadata, understanding, for an example, understanding the data model or the processes before we start loading the data. When we go to release the processes, they're the ones that got generated here in the analyze phase. And then when it comes into the operate phase, that training and feedback and the compliance is using the process maps. So here's a high-level architecture of how Elements works. We have this central database running on top of AWS, which incidentally means that it's not just for Salesforce. You can use this approach for any application, SAP, Workday, ServiceNow. And that central database running on AWS is pulling, for Salesforce, it's pulling all the Salesforce org metadata and doing the analysis, using the metadata API, the dependency API, tools, and UI API. We're obviously linking to existing documentation. So you don't have to create all new documentation. If it already exists, link it. Take a photograph, link it. If you've got a lucid chart because you're not drawing process diagrams using Elements, link it. But you also can obviously draw process diagrams inside Elements. And then the really important thing is we're presenting this content in the context of a role. So the Salesforce admin can use the Elements app, the Elements mobile app, or inside Salesforce with the Chrome extension. The business analyst is using the Elements app for process mapping and ERDs. But the developer, they can see the content inside Elements, inside Chrome, Salesforce, inside Capado, and inside Jira. And the end users can see this inside our application, or they can see it inside Salesforce using the Chrome extension. So the power of this is we are essentially pulling the data from the different locations, aggregating it, and then providing it at point of need where the different personas need it. So let's go and see how this works in practice. So let's start on a page layout. So we're looking at this from a user's perspective. This happens to be a custom object in Lightning, but equally well it could be in Classic, or it could be a standard object. And this looks like any page layout you would normally see, except you'll see some slight differences. There are some purple icons here. So instead of the gray help icon, it's now purple. And there's also an icon here, help icon against an object. And if you click on that, you can open up it could be a URL, it could be a process diagram, could be notes, and there's a feedback button, and that's available both at object level, but also at a field level. So I click there on the field. Again, you can see some more notes. In fact, let's click on one of those. So there's a note on how to enter budgets in dollars, and I can vote it, yes, that's helpful. Equally well, I could link, and here is a process diagram that's been drawn using Elements, and there's some supporting information. This is how I actually scope out a project. And again, I can vote on it. And this is a live diagram. It's not just a screenshot. I can zoom in and out. I could go to a high level diagram. So I can see where scope project is in the context of the high level diagram. And we'll talk a little bit more about process maps a bit later on. I can also have some discussion. But the reason I'm really here is that I want to kick off a change. In this budget field here, I can see this feedback button, and I can see that someone's entered, this needs to be updated to a currency field, also needs validation. So somebody's already beaten me to it. They've already added some comments here about what I thought was needed. So let's go and see where those comments have gone. So here we are. Here is our list of feedback. This feedback could have come from end users entering it on objects, page layouts. It could come from people entering it around process diagrams who are inside Salesforce, or they may be outside Salesforce. There may be process diagrams that are associated with, say, the HR process, nothing at all to do with Salesforce. So this is my list of feedback. I can then take any feedback and either turn it straight into a user story, or I could create a requirement. And this pop-out panel here, this is associated with this particular user story. I can see the discussion. There's the discussion associated with this user story. You remember seeing that being typed into the record page. And also there's a link there to a user story that's already been created. And if I click there, it will open up the user story. So here's the user story, and you can start to see that, again, same idea, there's this right panel for more information. I can see the information about the user story. I can see that it is synchronized to Jira, and there's the link to Jira, and we'll use that in a moment. I can see the metadata items that we think are going to be used or changed in this user story. So there's a custom object, there's a budget field, there is a validation rule, and another validation rule. I can also add documentation. So maybe there are some notes here. Maybe there's a link to a third-party document via URL. There's a link there to a process diagram. So again, we can start to add more information to the user story. If I go and click on that user story, I can now click there and open up this user story inside Jira. So I'm synchronizing this user story with Jira. And there is the user story in Jira. And again, this right panel, we can now see all the information that was entered inside Elements instantly inside Jira. So the important thing here is that it doesn't matter whether I'm a business analyst creating user story in Elements or a developer starting to look at this inside Jira, we're all looking at the same supporting information. Now, this user story in Jira can then make its way across to Capado, and that same information will follow it. So here I am inside Capado. Here's the user story. You can see there the link back to the user story in Elements. I can see the status. That status field is synchronized to the Jira status field, and that Jira status field is synchronized to the Element status field. So we're keeping these three user stories all in sync. The release that comes out next week, there will be a panel just here which provides all that information from Elements directly into the user story inside Capado. So it doesn't matter where you are, Jira, Elements, and Capado, you're seeing all that supporting information. But a user story is made up of metadata. So if we go to the metadata items, and let's say we look at that field called budget, let's just open up that metadata item, the budget field. And you can instantly see now the right-hand panel, which comes from Elements, that's now giving us the information about this particular field. It's telling us about what type of field it is, when it was created. It's giving the opportunity, there's an optimize tab for cleanup. But what's interesting is this is now telling us everywhere this field is used. How well populated is it by record type? It's used in one formula field. If I roll over that, it tells me about the formula fields. It's used in 4 page layouts. Probably some of those aren't being used. Project Pete in Finance is the name of that page layout. It's used in a number of reports. It's used in 2 validation rules. And it's not used in any of these 11 other metadata types. So we look at 15 different metadata types. So that's the first level of where used. But the next question is, what are the knock-on effects? If I make a change to this, what other metadata items do I need to consider? Do I need to add to my manifest? We've got this where used analysis, and I could run it. I see it's been run before. Let me go and just open it there. Now this is using the dependency API, the metadata API, and a ton of code that we've written to be able to build this picture. So we're looking at this field called budget. If I click on that, it will give me all that information about the field that we saw before. Again, if I click on that, it will open up this field in our metadata dictionary, and I'll look at that in a moment. If I click there, it will open up this field inside setup, and that same right panel that's in Capado will also appear inside setup. We'll go back and have a look at that in a moment. But whilst we're here, I can see this field is used in these different places, used in that page layout. Again, we're giving you more information about it. But if there's a little plus, click on that, it will now open it up. I can see that this custom field is used by that one, but there's another custom field. Again, I can take a look at it and open it again. And there's no limit to the number of levels that this will go down. But what this is telling me is before I make that change, I need to understand the implications of the change of this field on all of these other metadata items. So really powerful. Obviously, we use Elements inside our own company, inside Elements. Our admin says that he doesn't make a change without at least clicking this dependency tree once, just to check. It doesn't matter how confident he is that, do you know what, that field isn't used? There have been a number of occasions where he's gone, I'm sure it's not used, clicked on it, and then had forgotten about a dependency. Had he not made that one check, he would have broken the org. So this is an important way of making sure that you're covering all the bases. But there's also another interesting angle here. If you're a consultant listening to this, or an admin watching this, and someone says to you, that can't take very long, surely you can just make that change really easily. Here is the evidence to show that that change is a bit more complicated than people first thought. So it's a great way of starting to say, you know, this is actually going to take 3 days' work. This isn't an hour's work. Look, I need to go back and make sure how this currency field is being used. Maybe there are some links here to Apex classes, maybe to validation rules that need to be checked. So this is a great way of making sure you've got the supporting evidence about how long things take. And of course, the other thing that you can do here on this next tab down, you can start to add documentation. I can see that this field here is used in an Oracle Financials integration. Wow, okay, so a bit more implied in making that change than I first thought. I can also see there are a number of different documents. Maybe there's a screenshot here taken with our mobile app of a whiteboard, or maybe it was just an image like this taken off the web. And of course, links to process diagrams. So we start to understand where this field is used in 2 different process diagrams. A bit further down, we can see that this field has been used or is related to 3 different requirements. And you can see the different statuses of those requirements. And of course, there's the user story where it all started. Every metadata item, you can start to see the discussion again, this discussion that started at the very beginning of this little demo. So again, back to everywhere we are surfacing this information. So every person, whether you're the analyst, developer, or a consultant, has the most up-to-date and consistent view of all the data. On this last item, we will show you which profiles and permission sets and which users have access to a particular field. So a slew of information aggregated here associated with a metadata item. Now, I promised you a couple of things. One is that I would show you where this field pops up inside setup. And it will open up inside Classic or Lightning, but again, the same idea, the same panel. All the information we showed you inside Capado and inside Elements, here it is, all inside setup. So again, a single source of truth of all of this documentation. So where does this all come from? We build a metadata dictionary and we synchronize it every night from production and sandboxes. And here you can see everything in the org, and it's a tree structure. So if I open it up, say, let's go down to objects. They're all my objects. If I go to, say, the project object, here I can see everything associated with the object, how many custom fields, how many page layouts, how many records by record type. There is that optimization tab where if I want to start tracking and saying, actually, this needs to be deleted, needs help, and so on. So think of this as the to-do list for your cleanup activities. Now at an object level, here is the where used. So if you think about field trip, those who are used to using that, this is field trip on steroids. So this is the view of every field for every object calculated automatically for you. So you can start to see which fields are being used, which have no data. And then again, the dependency analysis that we saw before, the documentation tab, the links to requirements and user stories, and then the discussion. So again, all of this is inside Salesforce, and this is an object, could be a field, could be an Apex class, could be a process builder. Every single metadata item that we synchronize into this org has the ability to have all this information associated with it. And we're keeping this up to date every single night. The other thing is that inside our application, comprehensive reporting. So you can start to report on, I know, tell me all the field access, give me all the field usage across an object. Maybe I want to compare a production org with a sandbox, or maybe I actually want to look at a managed package to understand whether it's used and I can remove it. So again, once we have all this information in the metadata dictionary, we can distribute it out into Jira, Capado, Salesforce, but also there's a slew of analysis that you can do inside Elements. So the last question is, how did that pop-up help appear inside Salesforce? So this right panel where we have documentation, you can decide to make any documentation you add visible as help in Lightning. So here, that how to run projects, I simply do one checkbox and say, make this particular document, or in this case, it happens to be a URL link. Or if I go down to that budget field, let's find the budget field. And look at the documentation tab. There is that document about Oracle financials. We've said don't show that as user help, but entering budgets in dollars do show that as help. So let's just go back to our page layout. And there's the budget field, entering budgets in dollars, entering budgets non-US dollars, and scope project. Let's go back to there. You can see do show in help, do show in help. If I want to go and show this in help, probably wouldn't be appropriate, but let's do it anyway. Let's go back to that page. I haven't refreshed the page. There's that new help. And again, those help topics are how can have images, they can have rich text, you can embed videos, embed spreadsheets. So very, very quick way of starting to provide help to your end users and then capture feedback. And obviously, I've just added that help in the right panel inside our application. But of course, if I'm inside setup, that same right panel for that field, there it is. Or if I'm inside Capado, same right panel, there it is. So I can be adding help documentation from inside Capado, inside Elements, or inside Salesforce. So there we are. We've now come full circle from feedback all the way through analysis, around through delivery, and then back to help and feedback. Well, the first thing is you need a business case. And I think you can start to see the business benefits are around increased Salesforce adoption, accelerating that implementation lifecycle, and reducing delivery risk. So very easy to build a business case based on those benefits. And the first place to look is actually how much you can empower your business users to be more effective, because that's where the real leverage is. But secondly, you can reduce the time and effort from your development teams and reduce the risk. So the next steps, setting up a proof of concept takes about 2 minutes to set up a proof of concept inside Elements. We connect to your org and start syncing. Takes about anything between 15 minutes and 2 hours to analyze an org. Probably 2 hours for the biggest orgs we're looking at with 60, 80,000 metadata items. So if you're an existing Copado customer, then contact your Copado AE. We've got a special Elements enterprise pricing structures specifically for Copado customers. If you're new to Copado and new to Elements, then contact Copado at Elements.cloud or go and visit the webpage Elements.cloud/Copado. So thank you for joining me on this quick trip around the implementation lifecycle and showing you how you can accelerate that.